Dark Souls, a game released back in 2011, which was also developed by From Software and published by Namco Bandai for the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and Windows. Created by Hidaka Miyazaki, Dark Souls is a dark fantasy action RPG set in the world of Lordran, a medieval kingdom on the brink of falling to the undead curse. I hope to show those who are concerned about its infamously challenging gameplay and to demonstrate those who struggle to give it another shot, a new perspective, and to keep motivated. Now then, let's get started. The design of this game is very gritty, which also relates quite a lot to the lore. It has very cold and dark colors, making the player feel almost helpless in this world, which really sets up the tone of the game. The shine of the armor and the amazing medieval architecture really sets the mood. And areas like Blighttown are disgusting, from its maggot-like creatures to its bloodthirsty flies, really sets the tone for some of the gruesome creatures you'll see later in the game. As we begin the game, we create a player character, a silent protagonist, which we create. Our next task is to pick our class. As with most RPGs, when you begin the game, you choose from a set amount of classes from characters, like the Knight, who has high defense, starts with more health, and is overall rounded in everything except for magic. The one incredible thing about this game is that you aren't actually locked into your class. There is an armor you can't wear. If you want to be cleric, but decide you'd rather do a straight up strength build, you can do that. I really like this game's mechanic of being able to literally build your character however you want, and being able to switch out relatively easy when you find an item or something that works for you. Weapons of all sorts of variety are found at the very beginning of the game, which can open up so many different playstyles and opportunities. Next, we need to pick our starting gift, and with this we come to our first flaw, communication with the game developers and the player. For a new player, looking at the starting gifts, you may be very confused, and only having a short description to go off of, you can easily be manipulated into thinking you're getting something better when it actually isn't. Items such as the binoculars, pendant, old witch's ring. To a new player starting out, items such as the master key and the tiny being's ring are quite good items to start with. The master key giving you access to newer areas without having to gain access to other keys, and also skipping an entire area with a boss. And the tiny being's ring, which gives you an extra 5% more health on top of what you have. All of these items can be attained in the very first half of the game, and some even right away if you know what you're doing. Like I said before whenever I was talking about the armor, you aren't locked out of these items. As you can see here, I just finished the tutorial, and all I had to do was run from this path to get the binoculars. You may have to go exploring or even look up at a guide on how to obtain the items, but they're never out of reach. The idea of the starting gift is just to give you that needed push to get past obstacles. You start off in the Undead Asylum, where all the undead in the world have been corralled to await the end of the world, as the intro explains to us. A knight looks down upon us and drops us a key, finally giving us control of our player character. In a third-person style, you move your character using the analog stick and start the tutorial, which teaches us the player controls using the in-game messages system placed by the developers. This shows off all the fighting mechanics, such as locking out enemies, light attacks, strong attacks, the rolling mechanic, which also has many different styles. That's the normal roll, which has an average amount of invincibility frames in which you cannot be hurt, the fast roll, which has the most, and the fat roll, or overburdened roll, which has the least amount of frames, and is extremely slow and overall not worth using. There are so many mechanics the game has done very well, but the lack of knowledge for the player can cause a very high difficulty gap. Another good example of this is strength weapons. Whenever you have a weapon that requires a certain amount of strength but you don't have the level, you can always two-hand the weapon. Whatever your strength level doubles whenever you two-hand a weapon, but isn't shown in the actual character stats. So you can actually still use the weapon, but you have to stay two-handing it to do any damage. If you look at in-game shield stats, you can see the right number that goes up to 100. The number in question is actually your block rate. If you have 100% physical, you will block 100% of the physical attacks with your shield. The same for fire, electric, magic attacks. Whatever the number is, it's actually a percentage of how much damage you'll block. What makes this more confusing is that this is on every weapon and shield in the game, making this very confusing for some players, as weapons can be used to block, but aren't very good for it. Out of all these stats, you only really need to pay attention to these numbers. Poise is a very important stat to focus in if you plan on wearing a lot of heavy armor. Poise is basically how many hits you can take before being staggered by an enemy. Bigger enemies can break your poise faster, so you have to be careful as to not get surrounded by enemies and unable to attack. Simply running back and taking a quick break from the battle to restore your stamina will fix this. In the tutorial, you're introduced to a new mechanic, which is bonfires. Sitting at a bonfire will restore your health and your Estus, which is your healing flask. But doing so also restores all the enemies in the area. This gives the player the feeling of dread when they start to run out of their own healing item. Do they go back to the bonfire and attempt the area again, trying to save more Estus? Or do they decide to push through it and see how far they can get, even if it means getting to the boss with no healing items? But could there also be a bonfire around the corner? we won't know until we try. When playing Dark Souls, there's one thing you have to accept, and that is, you are going to die. A lot. This can be rather discouraging, and it causes a lot of players to quit the game after losing a lot of souls, the main item that you use in the game for leveling up, and for the game's currency. You get souls from everything, from killing NPCs to finding them on corpses. Whenever you use them, they add up to your soul counter in the bottom right of the screen. When the player dies and is revived at the bonfire, wherever they died 10 seconds before, your souls will be placed. This is your only chance to recover them. If you do not recover your souls, if you die again, they will be gone forever. The player then must work efficiently so that they can manage to get to the point where they died without dying once more. Leveling up increases your health, your stamina, equip burden, and the number of magic attacks that you can use. And for my favorite part of the game is the amount of customization you can do with different weapons and variety of builds. When playing Dark Souls, you may decide, I want to use really big swords. Or you may decide, I want to use really fast curved weapons. Both these builds have different variations of attack forms, such as the strength build, using a very heavy weapon. You have to be very careful about how you time your swings. Different weapons have a different length of range and different amount of movesets. Take the Zweihander for instance, an early game weapon that you can find that's quite strong and powerful to use. Its heavy attack, which you can see here, will flatten most smaller enemies. I find this very interesting, as I can switch weapons around and have different playstyles and different types of experiences with the game. Now that we've learned about the gameplay and how the actual world works, it's time to talk about the story. Unlike a traditional story, we as the player are meant to learn from the world, and the atmosphere sets the tone. Only a few key moments in this game tell us what's actually happening, and some of it can be even straight up lies. This is one game that doesn't hold your hand, but it gives you the tools to succeed. So after making your player character, here is the opening cutscene of the game. This scene shows us all of the characters and the world that we'll get to know.
In the age of ancients, the world was unformed, shrouded by fog. A land of grey crags, arch trees, and everlasting dragons. But then there was fire, and with fire came disparity. Heat and cold, life and death, and of course, light and dark. Then from the dark they came and found the souls of lords within the flame. Nito, the first of the dead. The Witch of Izalith and her daughters of Chaos. Gwyn, the Lord of Sunlight, and his faithful knights. And the furtive pygmy, so easily forgotten. With the strength of lords, they challenged the dragons. Gwyn's mighty lords peeled apart their stone scales. The witches weaved great firestorms. Nito unleashed a miasma of death and disease. And Seath, the scales, betrayed his own, and the dragons were no more. Thus began the Age of Fire. But soon the flames will fade, and only dark will remain. Even now, there are only embers, and man sees not light, but only endless nights. And amongst the living are seen carriers of the accursed dark sign. Yes, indeed. The dark sign brands the undead. And in this land, the undead are corralled and led to the north. Where they are locked away to await the end of the world. This is your fate.
Now that may have sounded very complex and hard to follow, but essentially, in the beginning, there was nothing, until suddenly, fire came into the world, and beings rose from the darkness. 4 of these beings were given great souls, and one of them, Lord Gwyn, challenged the dragons of the world. All 4 of these lords banded together to help defeat the dragons, for in this world, dragons which have scales are immortal, but with the help of a dragon who was born without souls, they were able to defeat them. But this is not the end, as the first flame is now fading, and as the fire fades, Gwyn decided to sacrifice himself in order to keep the fire lit, giving his souls to other beings across the world. This is where you come in. You are a fated undead, which was corralled to the asylum. And as stated by Oswald of Astoria at the beginning of the game...
Oh, you. You're no hollow. Thank goodness. I'm done for, I'm afraid. I'll die soon, then lose my sanity. I wish to ask something of you. You and I are both undead. Hear me out, will you? Regrettably, I have failed in my mission, but perhaps you can keep the torch lit. There is an old saying in my family, "Thou who art undead art chosen. In thine exodus from the undead asylum, maketh pilgrimage to the land of ancient lords. When thou ringeth the bell of awakening, the fate of the undead thou shalt know." Well, now you know. And I can die with hope in my heart. Now I must bid farewell. I would hate to harm you after death. So go now, and thank you.
In a way, our characters are immortal, being cursed of the undead, meaning we cannot die. Those who are imprinted with the dark sign on their chest are fated to live out until the end of the world, or in this case, until they turn hollow. Hollowing is a term used in Dark Souls, which essentially means that the creature has no form of what they used to be, and are nothing more than aggravated monsters. A lot of fans like to interpret the concept of dying in Dark Souls to the fact that hollowing is eventually going to happen to you as well. If you, the player, stops playing the game, it's as if your character has lost his mind and eventually has succumbed to his mad hollow ways, just like the creatures that you see in the beginning. But that's what's so great about this game. A lot of the story can be put up for interpretation, which can lead to a lot of fan theories. There are many NPCs that you meet in the game, which you will come across countless times. I don't want to spoil any of these stories to any newcomers, as they are quite memorable and fun to go on your own. But if you'd like to learn more, VadiVidya, a YouTuber whose link's on the screen right now, does a lot of amazing lore videos, which shows just how in-depth all of these amazing characters you'll meet along your journey are. With that being said, if you're a newcomer to Dark Souls, I hope you give it a shot, and if you're a returning player to the series, hopefully this video helps. I hope you all enjoyed, and thank you for watching.
Like a magnificent father. If only I could be so grossly incandescent.